Hari Om Swamiji.
Hari Om.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the continuation of the discussion on the foundational texts of Indian philosophy. This meeting will be recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. So if you have missed any of the previous discussions, you may find it on YouTube. There will be a question and answer segment at the end of the discussion. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask. Please maintain the queue by using the raise hand feature of Zoom. If you are not speaking, please mute yourself in order to minimize the disturbances. Thank you very much.
Recording in progress.
Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatar varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha Sudhismriti purananam alayam karunalayam namami bhagavat padam shankaram lokashankaram. So we are discussing this important book, which is known as Brahma Sutra. As you say, it's called, in English you find Brahma Sutras, it is written, because Brahma Sutrani in Sanskrit. Altogether there are 555 sutras, and you find there are slight variations in the way these sutras are calculated. You find different numbers according to different scholars. But anyway, the standard view, the commonly accepted view is that there are altogether 555 sutras. Now, what is a sutra? That may require some explanation. It's called sutram. So, there is a popular definition that is Alpaksharam asagdigdam saravat vishwato mukham astobham anavadyam cha sutram sutra vido viduhu. According to scholars, according to knowledgeable people, this is the sutra. What is sutra? First of all, Alpakshara means only a few letters, just a few letters. There are some sutras which are not even in the form of a complete word. For example, in the Vyakarana Sutras of Panini, only two letters, which explains some of the intricacies of Vyakarana, especially in the interpretative structure. So, a sutram need not necessarily be a complete sentence or even a full word, but mostly there will be one word at least, mostly. And there are some sutras which are quite long, some which are very, very short. So you find even those who have studied, who already listened to Yoga Sutra classes, you will know that. So a sutra cannot be really understood because it contains only few words or few letters, but it is loaded with meaning which can be expanded. Comprehensive expansion, interpretation will be required, and once you study it, you will have no doubt about it. So most of our Indian philosophical systems belonging to the traditional orthodox school, Astika tradition, will have some sutra origin. I mean, their most original, the earliest, the foundational work is always in the form of sutras. For example, Mimamsa Sutras of Jaimini, this Vedanta Sutras of Badarayana that we are discussing now, again Nyaya Sutras of Gautama, and the Vaisheshika Sutras of Kanada, Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Sankhya Sutras of Kapila. Like that, of course, in the Buddhist tradition, there is not much of a sutra tradition, sutra practice. But in most of the traditional orthodox systems of Indian philosophy will have the sutra foundation. Now, to give a short example, if you look at the different Vedanta systems of India, altogether you find almost 7 very distinct schools of Vedanta. We are not talking about Indian systems of philosophy in general. We are talking about only those systems of philosophy which are included in the Vedanta category. So just one of the 6 Astika darshanas, one of the 6 orthodox schools of philosophy. So, of course, the most well-known and naturally the most popular one is the tradition of Shankaracharya. It's called Advaita. So, Shankaracharya wrote a commentary in the 8th century. He wrote a commentary for Badarayana Sutras, which is supposed to be one of the masterpieces of a commentary on the Sutra literature. Then we have Ramanuja, who was another great scholar. He wrote an interpretation of Badarayana Sutras according to Visishta Advaita tradition. The Advaitins will tell you there is only one Nirguna Brahman, one ultimate reality, which transcends all attributes, characteristics, which cannot be defined or explained, but can only be experienced as our own inner being. And that's the only ultimate absolute reality. Everything else is relative, mithya, means Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya means relative, changing, impermanent in that sense. The second one, Ramanuja. Ramanuja believed in 3 systems, means that is Sat, Chit, Achit Brahman. So it's a Saguna Brahman. Chit, Achit, Visishta Brahman means Brahman conditioned by Chit, Achit. Chit is Chaitanya, or the Achit, this phenomenal world. The third one is Nimbarka. Of course, the Nimbarka, Madhva, the Ramanuja, they are more or less belong to the same time, within 200-300 years. Nimbarka lived in the 12th to 13th century, Dvaita Advaita. And he also believed in this Chit Achit. And then Madhva also was very popular in many parts of the southern India. Dvaita. Actually, Chaitanya system is philosophically indebted to Madhva Sampradaya. They claim that Madhva Sampradaya is the heritage, the spiritual heritage to which Chaitanya tradition belongs. So Madhva is called Dvaita system. And then there is a Vallabha, it's called Suddhadvaita. And then of course there is the system of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it's Gaudiya Vaishnava. And Baladeva wrote a commentary according to Chaitanya school. And then of course there are other, Bhaskaracharya wrote Bheda, the Vijnana Bhikshu wrote another commentary, then Shivadvaita, Srikantacharya, and so on. So I'm not going to all those details. So, but it's very interesting to get an idea of this great tradition. And then there are a number of other books written more or less dealing with the subjects of Brahma Sutra. It's of academic interest, how vast it is. So, to understand the fundamental, authentic philosophical literature of just one of the several philosophical traditions of India, like Vedanta, itself requires our lifelong dedication to study and contemplation. But just to give an example, I shall just give a list of some of the well-known works written on the topics related to Brahma Sutra. Altogether, there are 21. One is Bhashyartha Nyayamala by Subramanya, Vaiyasika Nyayamala by Bharati Tirtha is well known, belonging to Sankari tradition. Then Shastra Darpana by Amalananda. Amalananda was actually a great writer belonging to the Bhamadi Prasthana, Bhamadi school of Vedanta. Then, of course, there is a Vedanta Nyaya Bhushana, Swayam Prakasha, Brahma Sutra Vrutti, Haridikshida, Brahma Sutra Deepika by Shankarananda, Vedanta Sutra Muktavali, Brahmananda. Brahma Sutra Bhashya Artha Sangraha by Brahmananda Yeti, Brahma Sutra Artha Deepika by Venkata, Brahma Sutra Vritti by Annam Bhatta, Brahma Sutra Bhashya Vyakhya by Jnanottama Bhattaraga, Brahma Sutra Vritti by Dharmabha, then Sutra Bhashya Vyakhyanam by Advaitananda, Brahma Sutra Bhashya Vyakhya by Nyaya Rakshamani. It's called Nyaya Rakshamani, is another well-known book written by a very famous scholar, Appaya Dikshida. He was one of the prominent writers belonging to the southern tradition, southern school, South India. And Nyaya Rakshamani is a well-known book for those who want to study the dialectical dimensions of Vedanta, belonging to the Bhamadi tradition. Then Brahma Tattva Prakashika by Sadasivendra Saraswati, Brahma Sutra Vanyasa by Rameshwara Bharati, then Sharidika Mimamsa Sutra Siddhanta, Kaumudi by Subramanya Agnichit Mukhendra, then Vedanta Kaustuba by Siddharama, Sharidika Nyaya Manimala by Ananyanubhavan, Sharidika Mimamsa Nyaya Sangraha by Prakashatma, Sharidika Mimamsa Sangraha, another same book. Krishna Anubhuti, the same title. Just give an example of the huge literature. Now, it requires several years for one to study even one of these 21 important books. In addition to that, there are many, many other books. Now, coming to the text proper. So, we have already discussed several aspects of the text. But those of you who want to know a little more about the background, the evolution of this text. We do not know the exact time in which Badarayana wrote these Brahma Sutras. But we can safely assume that it must be very old because one of the important aspects to remember is the first well-known, the oldest and the most prominent commentary on Brahma Sutras even now is Shankara's commentary, belonging to 8th century AD. Now, what is Shankaracharya's place in Indian philosophy? I shall just give a few examples. Many of you know that these Vedas were not studied by all Hindus or by the whole Indian society, never. In fact, a large sections of Indian society were not actually even permitted to study Vedas, unfortunately. But gradually, there was a revolt against this exclusivism. And the first great revolutionary who rose against this exclusivism was Lord Krishna himself. So if you read the Bhagavad Gita, you find there are places where Sri Krishna himself talks against orthodoxy, exclusivism, and also the interpretation of the Vedas by the ritualists who believed that the whole purpose of human life is to continue performing rituals just for one's own material prosperity, material comfort. Yakshid dasyami modishye itya jnana vimohidaha aneka chitta vibhrantaha. You find Lord Krishna talking about them. These people say, Yakshe dasyami modishye. I shall perform rituals. I shall give away big gifts. Then I shall enjoy heavenly comforts in heaven. Now, and this is the only goal of human existence. And such people are called by Krishna idi ajnana vimohidaha, those who are deluded by ignorance. Now, historically speaking, the first revolutionary who rose against this Vedic exclusivism was Lord Buddha himself in the 6th century BC. As a coincidence, after Buddha's passing away, the teachings of Buddhism themselves became a new denomination. In the early days, mostly Hindu scholars used to flow into Buddhist faith, but gradually it became a separate religion in course of time, especially after it traveled across the borders, it got spread all over in Asian continent, it became a distinct religious tradition. 1200 years, 12 centuries later after Buddha, Shankaracharya was born in the 8th century AD. Now, during these 1200 years, a lot of changes had happened. Buddhism in India became irrelevant. Not Buddha. Buddha was extolled to the status of an incarnation, but Buddhism as a separate, distinct religious tradition lost its relevance as a separate denomination. Though Buddhism that spread outside India took the form of a definite, distinct religious religious tradition, within India, Buddhism was absorbed into Vedantic tradition. This happened due to two great philosophers who belonged to the Mimamsa school, and they were Kumarila Bhatta and his junior contemporary Prabhakara. They both reclaimed the predominance of Vedas, Vedic heritage, which was actually questioned and repudiated by Buddhists. So there was this conflict between Buddhists who did not accept the Vedas as a revolt against the exclusivism, and on the one hand, and Kumarila and Prabhakara, who wanted to reclaim the dominance of Vedas. So it was successfully accomplished by Kumarila Bhatta and Prabhakara later on. But what they did was something very unfortunate. They emphasized the idea again and again that the only purpose of Vedas was to teach you rituals. They did not accept any higher transcendental, metaphysical concept in Vedic heritage, Vedic literature. The whole purpose, the entire purpose of the study of the Vedas, the only theme in Vedic literature was performance of rituals. And the purpose of these rituals, the performance of rituals, was to attain heaven. Heaven after death, Surga Prapti. Surga Kamo Ejeda. Those who want to go to Surga, those who want to heaven, they should perform these rituals. Now, in 8th century, Shankaracharya arose. He said, no, you are wrong. Rituals are not the only purpose of Vedic literature. Not necessarily. Those who want to perform rituals, and as a result of performing rituals, those who want to go to heaven, those who want to please gods and goddesses, may obtain wealth, comforts, everything. But there are those who are not interested in going to heaven. There are those who are more evolved specimens of humanity, who tell you, well, I don't want this wealth. The wealth is not so very important. I am looking for some higher meaning in life. Even I don't want to go to heaven. After all, Hindu concept of heaven is not a permanent state of liberation. It is just a transient, momentary, and impermanent status where you enjoy some comforts and then you are born again. So Shankaracharya said, there are many highly enlightened people who are not interested in the heavenly comforts. They want to get spiritual liberation. They want to understand and experience the ultimate purpose of human life and human existence. So he evolved this doctrine of Advaita. He did not deny the right of those who want to go to heaven to perform rituals. All right, if you want to go to heaven, okay, you do that. But don't tell me that everyone should do only these rituals. Don't tell me that that's the only meaning and that's the only essence of Vedic philosophy. So he said, this is chittasya shuddhaye karma natu vastupalabdhaye vastu siddhi vicharena na kinchit karma godibhihi. So he says, for example, you perform these rituals called karma, means rituals. Even if you continue performing rituals for hundreds of years, thousands of years, millions of years, still you cannot attain the highest spiritual liberation. For that, you have to understand the true meaning of your existence. You should understand your true nature. What is your essence? Are you just this body-mind complex that wants to enjoy things of this world? Or are you something more than that? This knowledge and this experience is the essence of Vedic teachings. And he said, to attain this, you need 4 disciplines. So now, in the Brahma Sutra, I have already sent to some of you the first 4 sutras. The first sutra, as those of you who have got it may remember, the first sutra is Athado Brahma Jijnasa, Atha Ataha Brahma Jijnasa. Now onwards, therefore, we shall make an inquiry into Brahman. This is meaning here, called Jijnasa Adhikaranam. The particular Adhikarana is a small unit of Brahma Sutras. A number of sutras will be included in one Adhikarana. So Adhikarana is just one unit. So what is Adhikarana? Adhikarana is essentially one part. So Vishayo Visayaschaiva Purvapakshasthadottaram Sangadhischedi Panchangam Shastre Adhikaranam Viduhu. So there are certain elements. One is a subject, then some doubts regarding this, and then there is a prima facie view which may not necessarily be correct, and then an analysis, and then there is an answer, the conclusion. This is the essence of Adhikarana. So, what it essentially means is simple. Vishaya, so for example, Vishaya means subject matter. For example, Samannayadhikaranam, Jijnasadhikaranam, etc. Jijnasadhikaranam means an adhikarana is only one sutra. It deals with Jijnasa, a desire to know. So there is a subject. Then Vishaya is possible doubts, and then Sangati is a pertinence, relevance of connection between the specific Upanishadic statements which is mentioned there, and of course, I mean the chapters and the particular pada. Now here I must tell you at the very beginning, in Brahma Sutras, you find the author quotes various sentences, various portions from the Upanishadic literature. That is what is called Nyaya Prasthanam, logically analyzing the meaning, the important statements of the Upanishadic portion of the Vedas. Upanishads constitute the philosophical part of Vedic literature. So there will be long quotations from Chandogya Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and different Upanishads. So these Upanishad statements are quoted and are logically analyzed. And then a conclusion is made on the basis of this. So Shankaracharya will tell you, all the Upanishads together tell you that existence is one, there is only one supreme reality, everything else is relative or changing entities. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. And Ramanujacharya will tell you, for example, the same Saguna Ishvara, God with attributes and characteristics, exists in all of us. That supreme God is Saguna Brahman, Mehe Vasudeva or Narayana, you call Vaishnava tradition. He has many attributes. Sagala Guna Kalyana Nidhi. He is a repository of all good qualities, all auspicious qualities. More or less, Madhva follow the same tradition. Madhva, Nimbarka, Baladeva, Chaitanya. More or less, you find in non-Advaitic interpretations of Brahma Sutras, there are many things which are very similar. They are fundamentally, if you use the English language, they are monotheistic in nature. Purva Paksha is something very interesting. So you are going to something very interesting, Purva Paksha. Purva Paksha literally means prima facie view. I mean, when you read something, well, let's say just on one reading, and the first impression, this is the meaning. But then the discussion begins. Somebody else, no, it's not like that. It could have another meaning. What is the correct meaning? Then discussion follows. So there will be an argument and heated debates and arguments between the person who has this Purva Paksha view. Purva Paksha view literally means what the impression that you get, the earlier impression, the first impression, before you actually get the correct impression. So that is indication. The correct impression is Siddhanta Paksha, I mean the conclusion, the real correct interpretation. Conclusion of Shankaracharya's commentary will be Advaita. The conclusion of Ramanuja's commentary will be a conclusion based on Visishtadvaita, which is Ramanuja's philosophy. Conclusion of Madhvacharya will be naturally a conclusion based on the Dvaita, the dualistic interpretation of the scriptures. So that is Siddhanta. Here, so Purva Paksha, this is a very important aspect. There are also some funny episodes that are very interesting. For example, I can just give an example. Philosophy can be very entertaining. That's something, if you read some of the Vedantic literature, highly dialectical, but there's also a little bit of humor and fun about it. In Bhamadi, for example, Bhamadi was written by a great, outstanding, unforgettable person in India's philosophical tradition. He was an householder, an old man. He had already started writing a commentary on Brahma Sutras. Brahma Sutra, he was writing a commentary on Shankaracharya's commentary on Brahma Sutras. It's called Bhamadi. He lived almost within 100 years of Shankaracharya's passing away. So he was an elder contemporary according to some views. So the Vajaspati, he actually lived in Mithila, which is one of the cradle of the Navya Nyaya, an important branch of the Indian tradition of logic, the tradition of Indian logic. So it originated in Mithila. And Mithila is a place associated with the great Janaka, the philosopher king whom we read about in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Anyway, this Vajaspati was a very great scholar who had written books on many, many subjects. He was already married, but he had already started writing his commentary on Shankaracharya's commentary on the Brahma Sutras. But he didn't stop writing. He was so dedicated to writing that great book. It is one of the most marvelous dialectical works written on Shankaracharya's Bhashyas. It is a long succession, Bhamadi, then Bhamadi Kalpadaru, a commentary on that commentary, Kalpadaru Parimala, then that's a commentary on the other previous commentary. Like that, and it goes on, so successive commentary after commentary after commentary, fine. So this man had already started writing his book, and after marriage also he continued writing. He never thought of living a worldly life. For him, philosophy was his life breath. Now the greatness of his wife was that she did not disturb him. She found her husband was writing a magnificent philosophical, dialectical magnum opus, and she didn't want to disturb. So she did all the household work silently, helped him, served him, and this man was immersed in philosophy. And it is a very interesting thing. And at some stage, after several years, he was coming to the end of his work, magnum opus. One day, one evening, this before electricity in the 9th century AD, and he found that an old woman with a grey hair was pouring oil on the lamp under which he was writing this commentary in the late evening. She looked at her and he recognized it was his wife. And then tears rolled down his eyes, and he understood her greatness, because she never disturbed her, never brought him into worldly duties and responsibilities. And he finished that book in a few days, and he gave one name to that book. That is the name of his wife, Bhamadi. So Bhamadi became immortal by him, because when he gave that name, his wife name to this unique work. Now that's one, but there's something interesting aspect about this Purva Paksha Siddhanta, this prima facie view, more or less in a lawyer, So it's a Latin expression which means on the face of it, first impression. But it's something little more than that. There will be a long discussion behind the statement of every prima facie view. So one good example, for example, in one of these books, Brahma jijñāsidavyam athva na jijñāsidavyam. See, there may be some people who may argue, why should we make this inquiry into Brahman? After all, adhado Brahma jijñāsa, there's a first sutra. So it doesn't seem to make sense. Because Brahman is everywhere, sarvam khalu idam Brahma. Brahman is everywhere. And Brahman it is sarvavyapi, means omnipresent, all-pervading. Why should you make an inquiry about it? This is a funny objection. Of course, Brahman is everywhere, but that doesn't help us much, because we think we are this body-mind complex, nothing more. So that the fact that Brahman is omnipresent, we are all essentially Brahman in nature, that spiritual, that intellectual idea may not be very helpful. We have to realize it as a fact, and for that we have to do a lot of spiritual practices, spiritual discipline. This is a fact. And then this objector, the one who raises this prima facie view, he gives so many, he raises so many arguments in defense of his objection, which will be demolished by Vajaspati. Now here, it is the writer himself The writer himself is raising all these objections. It's not that there are two warring groups which are conflicting with each other. The writer, the author himself is raising so many objections against his own theory, against his own thesis, because he wants to get an opportunity to drive home his arguments. If he unilaterally, if he goes on explaining, describing his view, it will be very boring. So in order to make the whole thing more profound, in his mind, he raises so many different possible, all kinds of conceivable objections against what he is going to establish in his book. After raising all these objections, then he begins to demolish all those objections. And then he establishes his thesis. So when I was teaching this, long ago, years ago, decades ago, so to speak, somebody in the, a small class with 10 or 12 people, 12 students, one of them raised this question. Suppose your friend is walking in the street and you go to him, look here, if you hit me, I shall hit you. If you call me all these names, and gives a long list of names that if you call me, I shall give you this reply. The other man says, but I didn't call you any name, so why should you threaten me? No, I did not say that you call me these names. I'm telling you, if you ever call me these names, this is the retort I'm going to give to you. So I'm just giving an example. It shows on the way it looks a bit comical, but the point is on the one hand it's so profound. How a single idea can be approached from so many different angles, so many different mutually contradictory angles, and how the idea can be analyzed threadbare, eventually to conclude a central idea. And this is I know I can warn all of you, it can be fairly boring, but it will be intellectually very entertaining, very rewarding, because after all, a deep interest in higher philosophy may be what we need in this modern age of IT, technology, and superficiality, and the consequent problems. So if we can keep our mind engaged in some higher thoughts, if not this, maybe Kant you can take, Critica Pure Reason or Plato, but in this there is one difference. Here, eventually, we be forced to think, what am I living for? What's the purpose of human existence? So I will come to this first sutra again. The first sutra is Atha Ataha Brahma Jignasa. The Jignasa Adhikaranam, desire to know. So when do we develop a desire to know the higher transcendental truth? When we are ready for it. Unless our mind is ready for it, we won't have the desire to know what is beyond what we already know. Unless we know something, we won't have a desire to know what is beyond what we already know. Now here there are two possible interpretations. So I shall just read this Adhikaranam. Avicharyam va vicharyam va brahmabhyasa nirupanat asandeha abalatvabhyam na vicharam tadarkadi adhyasoham buddhisiddhoha asangam brahma sudiridam sandeha muktibhavacha vicharyam brahma vedataha. Anyway, this is the Adhikarana. Now, I shall give a brief outline of what we are going to discuss. Henceforth, now onwards, what does it mean? I can remind you of the first sutra of yoga, Atha Yoga Anushasana. Henceforth, we can inquire we can discuss, or we can instruct, we can begin a discussion, we can start an instruction on yoga. That is Yoga Sutra. Adhado Dharma Jijnasa. That is again in Jaimini Sutra. So, but when do we actually think of in making an investigation, an inquiry into the ultimate truth? Not after a lot of actions. That's an important thing. So some of the ritualistic philosophers will tell you, you perform a number of rituals, and you study all the previous branches of Vedas like Karma Kanda, and then you study, you make an inquiry into the nature of Brahman. Now Shankaracharya says no. Because he says there are many people who study Vedas all the time, and still they study the Vedas, they perform rituals, and they ask for dakshina, they make a lot of money, they also build big homes, big cars, maybe in modern times in a different way perhaps. But that doesn't necessarily make them to think of what lies beyond. Nachiketa's third boon, you have to remember. Nachiketa's first boon that he asked in Kathopanishad. In Kathopanishad, Nachiketa, the student, the small boy, one day he discovered that his father was performing a ritual. And he was a very rich man, very prominent person. Now, one important item of the ritual was that he should give away whatever he possesses, whatever property he possesses. So in those days, cows were an important part of wealth and property. So he was giving away all worthless cows, old cows that cannot eat grass, cows that will not give milk any longer, cows that which cannot drink water. Pidodaga jagdadurna dugdadoga nirindriyaha, the Kathopanishad says. This is a meaning. So that boy approached his father. Father, the most important part of the ritual is you should give your most precious wealth to those who are in need of that. I am your eldest son. To whom are you going to give me? The little boy innocently he asked this, and father got angry when he repeated again and again, Ditiyam Tridiyam Sahovaja. Twice, 3 times he asked. Then father retorted angrily, Murtive Tvam Dadamiti, I am going to give you to the Lord of Death. You get lost, that could be the modern equivalent in modern English. And the boy wanted to make his father's words come true, and he started his journey to the Lord of Death, Yama. Yama was not there. So he came only after 3 days. So for 3 days, the little boy waited for Yama in his palace. So Yama, as a compensation, asked him, well, you can ask for 3 boons. The first boon that the boy is asking is, it corresponds to our needs in this empirical world. Wealth, job, security, insurance, car, house, bank balance, all that. Shanda Sankalpa Sumana Edasya Vidamanyu Gautamama Abhimutyu Turprasistama Abhivade Prasida Edatrayanam Prathamam Barambrani. The first boon is, my father should speak to me presently. He should not be angry with me. And by implication, he was asking for material prosperity, happy family life. Then he found, well, that won't last for long. Then he asked for the second boon. The second boon that he asked for was, after death, I should be able to go to heaven, and there I should be able to enjoy all the wonderful things of heaven. So Sattumadhyam Sorgyam Deshimurtyo Prabruhitam Sadadanaya Mahyam Sorgaloga Amrutam Bhajante Edatrayanam Didiyam Varamprane. The second boon is, you should teach me a Vedic ritual, by performing which I can go to heaven. because they I can live for a long time like angels, devas, second born. So that's a view of the Mimamsakas. Perform, work hard, be efficient, make a lot of money, and study Vedas, perform rituals, again study the Vedas, perform rituals, make more money. So you don't actually move 1 inch forward in this process. So Nachiketa asked for the third boon. Third boon is Ayam prede vijigitsa manushya asti tyege na ayam asti dijaigi edad vidyam anusishtastoyaham varanam esha varastratiyaga. Some people say death is the end of everything. Some people say no, death is only a comma, a semicolon. Some people say something remains even after death. Some people say nothing remains. You should teach me the real nature or this absolute truth. What happens to a person when he dies? Is there something eternal, immortal, permanent, everlasting? That you teach me. So Brahma Vidya, the knowledge of the Supreme Reality and how to attain that. So Yama goes on describing this. Now, this Nachiketa, he was not a Vedic scholar. He was not a ritualist. But when he realized one after another, when he thought about these 2 boons, he understood, well, this is not going to last long. So, I should look for the highest supreme value in life. So, Shankaracharya says, Atha means when you reach a level of supreme spiritual wisdom, called mumukshuttu, means a desire for spiritual liberation. And he says there are 7 characteristics which describe this urge, this supreme desire for the highest spiritual emancipation, enlightenment. It is called sadhana chadushtaya sampatti and sravanam marinam nididhyasanam in technical Sanskrit language. Means you should have a sense of what is eternal, what is of eternal value and what is of non-eternal value. So, nitya, anitya, vastu, vivekaka. What is nitya, eternal? What is anitya, non-eternal? And then, iha amutra phala bhoga viraga. So, you should also realize that all the enjoyments in this world and in heaven, they are all temporal, they are transient, they are non-eternal. So you should have a sense of renunciation of all these worldly things. The third is samadhi sharka sambatti. Shama, dhamma, diksha, ubaradi, samadhanam, etc. So you should have this samadhi sharka sambatti. And then mumukshutvam, a strong desire for spiritual enlightenment. So the point is, this cannot come for everyone just because you already performed a lot of rituals or you already had enjoyed a lot of wealth. And again, it is not necessary for you to enjoy all the worldly things, to feel a total sense of renunciation. It can happen anytime. Sometimes children become great philosophers. Sometimes very old, rich, big persons, they are not even as wise as young boys. So you can find this in the spiritual sense, not in academic sense. So the point is, atha means now onwards, when you are already fed up with, not because you have gone through every little bit of enjoyments, but you already have an inborn sense of spiritual wisdom, spiritual level-headedness to understand the ephemeral, the impermanent, the transient nature of all the worldly things. oh, I won't care for this. That's the stage when you begin your inquiry into Brahman. Like Nachiketa. Nachiketa was not an old man, very young boy. And then what you do? Then you may go to library, read a book. It may be something that takes you beyond this world. It may be something that reinforces your sense of renunciation, your sense of spiritual wisdom. It may reinforce your full conviction. Well, these things, these worldly things won't last for long. So there's no point in chasing these worldly enjoyments. After all, you go on enjoying, then you become rich, you become old, you enjoy and suffer, and you die, you're reborn again. Again the same cycle begins. It goes on rotating without moving 1 inch forward in the evolution of our life. So what's the use of it? So even before going through all this, if you can feel the sense of renunciation, then you can start your inquiry into Brahman. So Sravanam means reading scriptures. Mananam means thinking over this. Mananam, thinking over this. And Nididhyasana means being fully immersed, internalizing what you have read and what you have contemplated upon. So when this happens, therefore, then you should look for some higher meaning in life. That is the real meaning of the first sutra. Now Shankaracharya in his commentary, he brings in a whole lot of philosophy of adhyasa. It is called, superimposition. Very often in our life, we superimpose the real on the unreal and the unreal on the real. I shall read and explain later. For example, you have seen silver. You have a lot of silver plates, silver ornaments in your home. So you know silver is shining. So when you see something that is very, very shining, resembling silver, maybe you may see a mother of pearl or some conch shell or some creatures spread on the sand in a seashore, or river shore. You may see some shining outer shells of some creatures or conch or mother of pearl, what they call it. And from a distance you may mistake, oh, it's a piece of silver lying on the sand. So, because the quality of silver, the shining, that you already know. So when you see something which is shining, so what you do, you superimpose a silver on something because of its resemblance. So because of memory, smriti rupa means for memory. So superimpose. Like that, what do? We superimpose the absolute reality, the Brahman, in our own internal mechanisms, which are always changing, always moving, always in a flux. Our thoughts, our emotions and feelings, all these are changing all the time. So when I say, well, I was happy, when you just eat a chocolate, you say, I'm happy. Who am I happy? The Atman. Atman cannot be happy like that by eating chocolates. When you use the word I, you don't mean Atman, which is your true nature. You're talking about your own body-mind complex, happy and so on. So what we normally do, we superimpose silver on the mother of pearl, on the conch shell. Like that, we superimpose Atman in our ego, in our intellect, in our emotions, in our mind. And we also superimpose all this on Atman. So anyway, this is an interesting subject, adhyasa, it is called superimposition, and we'll discuss that later. It is an important theme in Vedantic literature. Actually, when we read this Vedanta, You need not have, you don't have to go through the entire karma kanda and then come to this conclusion. When we read some higher thing in a book, if you feel, well, this is something wonderful, it means we are in a state of intellectual fitness to understand the true meaning of it. If we are not ready for it intellectually, we won't be able to grasp its meaning. In spiritual life, the conviction that all these things in this world are only transient, impermanent things, we should look for some higher meaning in life. For that we should look higher than what we see around. So that comes as a result of spiritual fitness. So spiritual fitness comes only when we attain this sadhana sadushtaya sampatti. That means attaining the four important qualifications. First of all, a sense of what is real and what is unreal. Intellectually or emotionally, one day we may feel, oh, all these things are okay, but then next moment all will come back. It can happen. But when we think over again and again, we find the Vedantic idea that everything in this empirical world, including wealth and status and money and health and all these things, are necessary for you to live in this world, but don't ever think that they are going to be there all the time. And that Vedantic truth can become a kind of spiritual common sense. That's why the highest philosophy need not be dry. It is linked to our everyday life. It's not like reading Critique of Pure Reason or modern, please don't mind, modern philosophers, they don't always link what they're talking about, their doctrines, to our real life. If Vedanta actually serves one practical purpose, it is this. It makes us, it enables us to make use of the doctrine of the relativity of all empirical things as a kind of spiritual common sense, intellectual common sense, kind of intellectual level-headedness. So that's an important aspect of the Vedantic studies. We should never mistake that Vedanta is some dry, dialectical, metaphysical system which has nothing to do with our life. Advaita Vedanta will make every person to look at his own life and look at everything from a more mature, more level-headed perspective. That's the real purpose of Vedanta. Now you can ask questions. I will come back to the subject again in a more academic style from next class onwards. This is just a brief introduction of the first sutra. You can ask questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. Sri Ram Sant was up first.
Yeah.
Swamiji, first a couple of questions of clarification.
Yeah.
So first thing is, you said the author of the Brahma Sutras is Badarayana, not Vyasa.
Badarayana, yeah. Badarayana.
Second one.
Yeah. It may not be the Badarayana of the Vyasa of Mahabharata. Because there were many Vyasas. One Vyasa wrote the Vyasa Smriti.
Not Dvaipayana Vyasa.
Eh? The Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa. This is Badarayana. This Vyasa must be a later figure.
But he's also Badarayana Vyasa. He also has Vyasa as his name.
Yeah,
who
but
wrote the Brahma Sutra.
it can be the Badarayana tradition. Badarayana is a tradition of the Rishi Parampara, the succession of the ancient sages. So anyone who belongs to the Parampara, that lineage could be called like that. That's happens. Yeah.
My second question is, the Kumarila Bhatta and the Pravakara, they are Purva Mimamsakas, correct?
Yeah. Kumarila Bhatta was the senior person who wrote Tantravartikam, Slokavartikam, these famous important books, which are very extensive very well-known works, Kumarila and Prabhakara. Kumarila was the senior one, Prabhakara junior one.
They were Purva Mimamsakas. They didn't recognize
Purva
the
Mimamsa,
Vedanta.
yeah, wrote commentary, yeah, Purva Mimamsa.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah, thank you.
Please go ahead, David.
Hello, Swami. I had a question, actually not about this text, about one of your comments. I'd never heard that interpretation of the Katha Upanishad, that Nachiketa's 3 questions were actually a sequence from the material to Bhajananda to Satchidananda. So it was like the 3.
Yeah.
I'd never heard that interpretation. So he realized the impermanence instantly. He asked the first question, and then suddenly had the realization that's impermanent, and then suddenly had the realization that God wasn't the highest, but it was Advaita.
Yeah. Now, if you read Shankaracharya's commentaries on Katha Upanishad, you can see, Shankaracharya himself says, for example, how Nachiketa traveled from the state of the firstborn to the secondborn. First, the stage, he said his father should not be angry with him, and Shanta, he should speak pleasantly, happily with him, Shanta Sangha Pasumana, and his mind should be very pleasant because he had left his home without father's permission. So that was the thing. And then he realized that Yama readily agreed, gave him that boon. So, and in the commentary, Shankaracharya says, he knew that Yama, he had already a vision of Yama who was a god, it means angel, more like angel. So he won't have to worry about this material prosperity or everything will be secured because he had the blessings, the vision of that. But then what happens after his death? Again he may be born in a poor family again. He may again struggle, so what to do this? And again he will be blessed with prosperity, all the great things in this life, but they won't accompany him when he dies. So he thought of that, and then he asked for the second, to be able to go to heaven. And then he understood, well, what does it mean? Going to heaven means enjoying the same prosperity and wealth, everything in heaven maybe for a long time. It's not permanent. See, the Hindu concept, Vedantic concept of heaven is slightly different. In Brahmic tradition, in general, especially I'm talking about Christian tradition, that's what I'm familiar with from reading. So, in Christian concept of heaven, heaven corresponds to close proximity of God. You are living in the close proximity of God in Judeo-Christian tradition. I mean, you are living in a place in the company of angels, the company of God. So there is a spiritual connection in the Christian Jewish concepts of heaven. But that spiritual connection is not there in Vedantic Mimamsa concepts of heaven. Just enjoyments. Enjoyments with, remember, it is not Epicureanism or Bohemianism. Actually, Mimamsakas were very strict, very Spartan, very rigid in their disciplines, morality and all that. But still they wanted to enjoy children, disciples and all things like that. So Nachiketa understood that's not a big deal in using a modern language. It is not something very, very profound, they say. So, but is there something that is eternal? And what's my true nature? So he asked for the third book. So they said. So if you read Shankaracharya's commentaries, you can see this thread, this connecting thread, this evolutionary ladder you can see. If you read the Bhashya. So that's how you understand. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't. When I've taken classes, I hadn't heard that. So that evolution in Nachiketa's mind. So he must have been very bright within seconds to realize the next step. You know, that most of us spend a lifetime and don't get as far as he did in a few seconds.
Nachiketa's story, interestingly, it is found in the Mahabharata and also in some of the Brahmana Aranyaka literature in a more primitive form, where Nachiketa accompanied his father into the bathing garden, the river, and he disobeyed. So his father, he go to Yama's place. But this is in Kathopanishad, Krishna Yajurveda. It is in a very poet. It's a beautiful poetry. Kathopanishad is also very beautiful poetry. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Swami. I haven't, well, somebody else had a question, so I'll
please.
cede to them.
David, we'll come back to you. Mark has a question.
Yeah, please.
Pranam Swamiji.
Yeah.
I was looking up the Brahma Sutras, and while I was doing that, I came across something called the Vedanta Sutras.
Yeah.
And it seems to have the same author, but it has a commentary by Rajuma. Can you tell us a little bit about the Vedanta Sutras? I've never heard of that before.
You know, Brahma Sutra and Vedanta Sutra are two names of the same book. I mentioned this in the first class. Yeah. See, Brahma actually here means Vedas or Vedanta. The word Brahman also used in the sense of Vedanta or Vedas. In Bhagavad Purana, Brahma Samvida means equal to the Vedas, like that. So, Brahma here means Vedas or Vedanta. So, Vedanta and Brahman are same. So, that's interesting.
It's the same thing.
Yeah,
okay.
Same.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mark, you also mentioned that it had a commentary. Ramanuja.
This is just something I'm looking up on a library website.
Yeah, you
know, it's called Sacred Books of the East.
Yeah, I know. I know that. You see, in the Harvard series of Oriental series, the translations were all done in the early part of the literary tradition. So I would always suggest that you better read the translations published in later times. And I'm not saying because I belong to Ramakrishna order, but Ramakrishna order's translations are supposed to be more balanced and more accurate. Not because others are wrong, but remember the Harvard Oriental series, Sacred Books of the East, which was a great work, and Max Muller did a monumental work. But in those days, the resources for getting correct meaning were limited. You have to remember that. It's an important thing. They did a great work, no doubt. You find many of the commentaries on Yoga Sutras were also translated and published in Harvard Oriental series and Sacred Books of the East. But the point is, the translations in those days were undertaken by great scholars who worked hard with great dedication. But when it comes to accuracy or reliability, I would suggest that you better buy some translations from Ramakrishna order. The other translations also, they mostly belonging to rather 20th century translation, late 20th century. It's better.
It's a long book, the Brahma Sutras. It says here 880 pages, 800 pages.
The one you are reading, yeah, I know. Sacred Books of the East in 19th century. Max Muller took up this, a great work he did, because he brought to light all these great ancient works. But later, more dependable translations were published by scholars who knew both the original commentaries and also English. It's important thing, yeah. So, but their English may not be as readable. So, very often, Indian authors, in their attempt to be loyal to the text, the language tends to be more involved sentences, So, readability and directness may have suffered in their attempt to be true and loyal to the original text. This frequently happens. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj. This response may answer Vijay's chat question. I hope so. If not, Vijay, you'll chime in. David, let's circle back to you for your question.
Swami, two things. One is this reminds me that I was reading Swami Chaitnyananda's new book, Stories of Vedanta Monks, and he puts in there that Swami Sarvagatananda of Boston had asked him to write a Ramakrishna Sutras. So in that book, Swami Chaitnyananda has his attempt at the Ramakrishna Sutras. So it's but I thought that was interesting. But I did have a question. Why are the Brahma Sutras considered so important?
Yeah, one reason is it is a logical analysis of different Vedantic statements, Vedic statements, Upanishadic statements, using all the tools of logic. So, to understand its uniqueness, you compare it with the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is a very direct interpretation of a text. Without necessary, I mean, there are quotations from other books, but Vedanta Sutras quote mostly mantras or statements from Upanishadic literature. Then, of course, Mahabharata also you find. So that's important. Secondly, all the other systems of Indian philosophy, Buddhism, both the Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, Vijnanavadins, Shunyavadins, Purvamimamsa, Sankhya, Yoga, Charvakas, mean Indian materialists, all these ideas are brought in, and mutual, there is the dialectical discussions. So one may ask this question, why all this logic? The point is, if you ask the question, should we read Brahma Sutras to realize God? I won't say you don't have to do that. To realize God, you don't have to read Brahma Sutras. But this is an ancient tradition, a great intellectual tradition. In modern times, in my opinion, in this age, as I mentioned earlier, in this age of what we call a misguided idea of simplicity, which leads to superficiality, which almost becomes a religion, You should be very simple, straight. It means you just drink plain water and imagine you are eating wonderful food, really. So, these great philosophical books should be revived, the discussion should be revived, and that it can have a positive impact on human culture, refinement, intellectual refinement, human civilization. So, one of the casualties of this modern IT age is that you don't go for anything very serious or very profound. Everything should be simple, everything should be just right on your spot, and then you'll be okay. 20 minutes on Aristotle. You can have a video, listen to a video 20 minutes on Aristotle, and you can imagine you know all about Aristotle. It's certainly good. It does serve a great purpose, but there is a hidden precipice, hidden danger. I mean, Aristotle, the real Aristotle may disappear in a few years. And all the great works can remain unread and unused in the libraries applied to Aristotle. That's the thing. So these great books.
Swami?
Yeah.
It used to be 20 pages. Now you just read a tweet and you understand it.
Aristotle tweets.
Yeah. See, it used to be you read 20 pages years ago, but now you don't even have to read 20 pages, just a tweet or two.
Yeah.
And you understand.
Yeah. I don't think he would be amused if he reappears today and somebody makes a tweet on Aristotle and says, no, Aristotle over. I have seen this happening. Somebody puts a iPhone and quote with Aristotle, and there's something, everything ready, finished, Aristotle. That's a big problem. I don't say everyone should do that, but along with other things, this also should be there somewhere. That's the idea. It preserves an ancient heritage.
Maharaj, would you say, beyond preserving the ancient heritage and keeping the balloon afloat, would you agree that an immersion in the Brahma Sutra makes their greatness and importance and value self-evident?
Evident. You feel it is self-evident. You feel, do you feel?
Yes.
You feel that beyond preserving it as a great heritage coming from ancient times, there is its greatness, spiritual benefit is self-evident. I'm very happy to
Yes.
hear that. It's very rewarding to hear that, really speaking. Yeah.
You would agree with that?
I fully agree with that. I fully agree with that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. The IT age reduces your ability to listen to anything very profound for a long time, because it makes you exhausted. Because you sit in the same place, do the same thing for 25 years, 50 years. So you don't vertically grow intellectually. Horizontally, you remain the same stagnant ground. But if you study philosophy, remember, it has its own value, it's essential, it's part of modern culture, modern civilization. We cannot go back to Bullock age, no doubt. But these great ancient things also should be preserved. That's what I say. Along with IT and other things, that's what I say. Yeah.
I understand. There's a hand up from Ranjit.
Most welcome, most welcome.
This is just a comment about the comment that you had about this 10-minute video or 20-minute video. What I thought is that, for example, until
I can't hear you. We can't hear you.
today, I did not know about that you mentioned me.
Ranjit, you froze for a moment, so would you go backwards, rewind, and repeat your comment?
Can you hear now?
Yes.
No, what I was saying is that, for example, I did not know many of the things that you mentioned, many of the authors, including Vachaspati and the books that you mentioned. So if there were a small, let's say, a video or a version of it in YouTube, I would have seen it and maybe I would have had interest to read it. Now that I have heard from you, I of course have interest to understand and read this at some point of time. So having such short introduction somewhere is really useful for people to get introduced to it and then get interested in it,
Yeah.
I think.
No, that's true. What I mean, that's absolutely true. What I mean, YouTube and is a great blessing to education, to culture, technology. Absolutely, no doubt. But a cult of superficiality may emerge, and eventually
I agree.
it may remove, for all time, it may remove the tradition of making thorough studies of systems of philosophy. That frequently happens. It is atrophy. Many of the human skills get atrophied because due to non-use, just lack of opportunities for expression. After all, many of our skills, mathematics, calculating in mental calculations, memorization, traditional reading and learning can get atrophied. Skills can disappear. This is the great danger. That's what I say. Not in 1 year, but in a few decades.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. Sri Ram's hand is up.
Thank you. Most welcome.
Jesus, the book by Swami Vireshwarananda.
Yeah.
That is the definitive Ramakrishna Math publication on the Brahma Sutras. Is there anything more later than that?
Yeah, that's an important work by Vireshwarananda. It's a very important work. You can just Ramakrishna Mission publication, then you name any book, you type, you get it. The Google you can get. You can even use our own website. We have a very wonderful bookstore here, which sells books on not only on Hindu philosophical system, but Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, mysticism, and different traditions. You can find all books in our bookstore. So it's very easy to get here.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Maharaj, it's very interesting what you said about the skills atrophying, the skills of textual analysis, but also the tools of memory, tools of engagement with texts and traditions.
Yeah.
Very interesting, because they say that memory, use it or lose it.
Yeah.
And these skills are, even when they're taught, they will atrophy without practice. Would you agree?
Oh, I think so. No, the atrophy is a reality. It happens. That's true. It could happen. I believe. Even children or students lose the ability to make use of their own mind. And certain skills and faculties of the mind can really get atrophied, especially memory, calculating things, arithmetic, mental level. It can happen. It's a gift of nature. We outsource the gifts of nature to machines. So we practically end up being morons. This happened. But human potential, many of the human skills are not fully understood or made use of. Today we wonder how one can remember so many verses, so many systems of philosophy, but because we have a very poor idea of what we actually are capable of. That's the reason. Yeah.
Well, how inspiring to know that we are capable of it, and to see it demonstrated. Shay Felix, happy to see you. Please proceed.
Please.
Yeah. Happy to see you too, Bami. My question, Maharaj, is you've emphasized in some of your other lectures that like an intellectual understanding of Brahman, it's necessary to eventually get to realization, but it can be a barrier if we think that intellectual understanding is the full realization. So I'm wondering if, to me, the Brahma Sutra, is reading it when you're not fully prepared, when you're not fully ready for realization, could it be a hindrance to try to intellectually understand this book when without sort of the proper training?
No, you are right. You see, if look at what we are doing in this Vedanta society. Our Sunday lectures are not necessarily very profound in terms of the content, not as profound as the subject we are discussing now. Our Gita lecture that we have an in-person event in the old temple auditorium, it's more profound, more serious. This is still more. Now, what I mean to say, you are right. Intellectual understanding is not enough. Depending upon intellectual understanding alone without any spiritual discipline really makes no sense. It can be an obstacle. True. But here, what we are trying to do, we are trying to bring some ancient texts and discussing these. I mentioned earlier, we are not teaching meditation or prayer right now. We are teaching some ancient philosophical ideas which are part of our both spiritual and also philosophical heritage. So all these ideas are intimately linked to our spiritual life. So as part of our program, which is a bit academic also, monks cannot always teach you how to pray. They should also, we have to do something more serious also. There are, as you know, there are listeners, students with different temperament, different tastes. Some of them enjoy more simple, more direct. That's true. But some of them even appreciate these things. So there are people who enjoy reading Aristotle. Not that Aristotle can take you to God, but even reading these great philosophical authors, their works, it's a kind of, actually we are preserving an ancient intellectual heritage. I can tell you very clearly, it has a refining effect on the human intellect and mind. You go somewhere and listen to something sensational, discussing something which is eye-catching, like a advertisement for some maybe something that you buy in a market, Instead of that, something much more which have preserved some higher values. So it should also happen. I don't mean to say everything should go. This alone, everyone should read Brahma Sutra. We don't say that, for heaven's sake. But this also has a place in the rich heritage of human civilization. That's what I say. And that is very good. Yeah. When Meister Eckhart was revived, his interest in Eckhartian philosophy was revived by Rudolf Otto's translations and his works. It's a great sensation in Christian intellectual world. Eckhart almost disappeared. We don't know what happened to him. He lived in 13th century. Perhaps he was a far greater intellectual than even Augustine or Aquinas. Okay, they wrote. So he wrote in Old German and they wrote in Latin. But I mean to say, so these great men who thought of great things, great ideas, they have made a great contribution to the totality of human civilization. So in the 21st century, maybe this is something that we can try to make people remember about. People can be reminded of these aspects of human heritage. Doesn't it? Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. That appears to be the concluding question.
Yeah. Thank you, Shay, for this very, very, very important question. Thank you so much. So, Mr. Gopalan, anything? No? Okay. Thank you for this. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.
Recording stopped.